For those of you who are here in the first service, you're probably used to my deep southern accent now, because I'm from Atlanta, that's why, right? So I've got a lot of information. The subject I'm going to talk about today is not something that I would normally cover in a Sunday morning service. It would be more of a introductory talk on the creation versus evolution subject. But credit to your church, your pastor. He's had lots of ministry from CMI before. A few of my other speakers have been here. So the presumption is you're a little bit more nerdy. So we're going to do something a bit more in depth. But if you're not familiar with us, CMI, we have offices in 7 countries around the world. As mentioned, our US head office is here in Atlanta. Boys and girls, we employ lots and lots of scientists throughout our offices. So the issue here today is not really about science. They got their degrees in the very same universities as their evolution-believing counterparts. CMI, we call ourselves an information ministry. So we go to churches, over 300 churches a year normally, just here in the US, to bring information to you and your families. One of the great sources of information is our website. Our ministry has been going for over 40 years. There's over 15,500 articles on that website, and it's all absolutely free. You can use the search engine to type in any subjects, or if you see something in the news, for example, you can have a look there. But that's a really hard web address to remember, isn't it? Right? So when you see something, on National Geographic, a claim, they hold up a fossil and say, here's proof that apes evolved into humans 2 million years ago. All right? Remember the name of the fossil. Type it into our search engine. And as I said, we're an information ministry, and we want to connect you, your families, with information this morning. We're going to do a couple of things in the service. We have a free email news called Info Bites. Now, for example, maybe you've been at work, witnessing about the Lord Jesus to your colleagues or your children or your grandchildren come home, and they ask you questions like this. Well, if the Bible's true and we all started from Adam and Eve, where did all the different races come from? Who did Cain marry? What about dinosaurs? We dealt with that in the first session today, one of the most asked questions. Probably the most asked questions we get today as Christians, if God is a God of love, why does he allow all the death and suffering in the world? Why are the bad things happen? You had those questions? Of course you have. You've all had those questions. And so when you see a claim in the news or the media, and they like to disparage God at the same time, we'll usually have an answer within a couple of days. Let me give you an example. Do you remember Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter? His zoo was just a couple of hours north of where I lived in Australia. And when he was killed by that stingray, lots of people, including Christians, contacted our website and they said, well, why did God design stingrays that kill people? Right? A God of love. So we wrote an article on our website called The Stingray of Death, just a paragraph in our free email news. Send it out to folks like you on our electronic mailing list. You read it, you get equipped, but in this electronic age, you can just click forward. Hit it to your friends and your family members, etc. Okay? Fulfilling the Great Commission in a very easy way. So in a moment, my good-looking volunteers are going to come round, pass you some sign-up sheets. You can do that now, guys, if you want to start down the front. Just need your name, your email address, and your zip code. If you would pass them along and backwards a couple of rows, I'll get on with the talk while that's happening. And when you're finished, could you keep holding them up nice and high until the guys have picked them up off you? And we're going to do something again with them at the end of the service. All right. So this is not, as I said, about science. It's about worldviews. And a bit hard to see there, but the non-Christian worldview says the earth has been around for about 4.5 billion years. And over that time, chemicals became proteins, which became cells, which became everything on earth. And a process of death and suffering over millions of years is what has led to mankind. We are at the top of the evolutionary tree. And so evolution is much more than kind of apes to humans. It's kind of molecules to man. And you've all heard of Charles Darwin. His book, commonly called The Origin of Species, but the full title was or by means of natural selections or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Right there, if God used the process of evolution, then he's culled out millions and millions of species and unfit types of creatures to get to human beings. I don't think that sounds like a very loving God who professed on the Mount of Beatitudes, "Blessed are the meek." Now, natural selection, evolutionists believe, is the mechanism for change. It can ultimately turn, pond scum into professors over millions of years. And mums and dads, boys and girls, in my experience over 30 years, this issue, I have teens come up to me and argue fervently because their lecturers have said, look, we see creatures change over time. You can see creatures change. Therefore, evolution must be true. And so what the lecturer says, he says, I see evolution happening in my lab. It's a fact. And he's thinking about the different kinds of butterflies, or he might be thinking about different kinds of dogs. But he's not seeing dogs change into something completely different. But that's what the student generally thinks when they think of change. So this is an absolute key issue, ladies and gentlemen. So hold the boards up when you're finished, by the way, so the guys can pick them up. Thank you. So let's look at this. So you've heard of something called the simple cell. No such thing. No such thing as a simple cell. Right? In the nucleus of the cell of every living creature is the DNA molecule. I said before, it's like a chemical hard drive, right? And it has information stored on it. Just 4 letters, GCAT, and it's the combination of those letters that spells life. It's going to determine whether you're a frog, a fish, or a human being. Okay, it's been described as the most complex information storage system in the entire universe. We've never seen anything that can compare to the DNA molecule in terms of its compression rates and the way that it stores information. Now, for evolution to be true, to get from something simple to complex, you would have to add lots of information. The simplest organism on the earth, ladies and gentlemen, is a bacterium. The very simplest has 580,000 letters of information. Human beings, we've got 3 billion letters of information. So there has to be a mechanism, evolutionists believe, if you want to get from simple things like amoebas to horses. You've got to add encyclopedias worth of information. And they say natural selection and mutations are the mechanism. And we're going to look at that today. And it's very easy to understand. Okay? And I'm going to use the example of dogs because you own dogs, we understand different types of dogs, and Darwin himself actually thought dogs was a good example of selection and change. So if you look at the screen here, I've got a dad dog and a mum dog, and these things in the tummy here, I want you to imagine they're genes. Okay, there's a gene here that says make short fur, a gene that says make long fur. Mum's got a gene that says make short fur, make long fur. What's a gene? A gene is like a set of instructions, a sentence. The genome you could describe as the library. Okay, so mum and dad dog get married, they walk down the aisle, and they later have puppies. And they have one that's got short fur. So we know, don't we, from our biology classes, at conception we get one set of instructions from dad, one set of instructions from mum. So here, he ended up with the short fur gene instructions from dad and the short fur gene instructions from mum. So he ended up with short fur. By the way, imagine these parents here are in the medium range, middle length fur. And the reason is because they've got all the information necessary to produce differing fur lengths, as we see. So then you get ones that are in the medium length, just like the parents. Short fur gene from dad, long fur gene from mum, vice versa, long fur gene from dad, short fur gene from mum. Medium range. Different combination of the genes, but still medium fur like mum and dad. And then you get this critter, right? What happened there? Okay, so she only inherited the set of long-furred instructions from each of her parents. Ladies and gentlemen, have a look. We've got change. In one generation. Change. But is any evolution occurring? Because evolution requires new information. Any new information here? No, it's just a sorting out of pre-existing information that was already present in the parents. Okay? So now we've got a population of dogs that range from short, medium to long fur. Let's go and dump them in an Alaskan winter, which dogs would have a survival advantage in really cold weather? Which ones? Long fur, okay? Okay, so nature culls. Now, natural selection is not implying that nature's some conscious living entity, okay? Some creationists are getting bent out of shape and saying, oh, it deifies nature. The term natural selection was actually invented by a creationist. It's part of the creation model, pre-Darwin. It's just a term to describe that what we see in nature, the creatures without favorable traits, okay, don't survive in some locations and environments. So, dogs with long fur survive in cold weather. And then when they reproduce, what's going to happen? They'll only reproduce dogs with long fur. Oh, they've adapted to their environment. Is that evolution? No. Any new information? No. In fact, it's the opposite. We've lost genetic information from the population. They've become specialized, but look, it reduces information. Natural selection is a culling force. Doesn't produce anything new. And this is what we see in the real world, ladies and gentlemen. So don't be frightened, boys and girls, of the term natural selection, okay? They think that culling, okay, will lead to new information, but we don't see any new information being produced. So dogs do change, but they change into other types of dogs, okay? That's it. Have a look at these dogs. Okay, if you can call the Chihuahua a dog, but anyway, offend all the Chihuahua owners, but have a look. Look at the different bone size, bone shape. Technically, they could interbreed. Now, it's not going to happen in the real world, is it? But imagine you could artificially inseminate the Chihuahua, the mother, and her DNA will control the birth size. So that tells you they came from an original created kind. But just imagine if we hadn't seen these alive today and we'd only found their fossils in the ground, they look so different, they might call them separate species. But they're the same species, they're dogs, okay? And by the way, that's what happens if you inbreed dogs too much, all right. By the way, every known member of the cat family, the wild cat family, every known member can interbreed. So it shows you they came from an original created kind. Now it's technically possible. You can keep selecting like dog breeders, right? You can keep selecting down for traits, and every time you keep selecting down, you're reducing the genetic information. And it could be possible that they will no longer interbreed with the parent population they came from, okay? But that's, doesn't make them separate species. As I said, it's just a reduction in information. So evolution requires new information. Now, the world's leading evangelist for Darwin, you've probably heard of him, Richard Dawkins, professor from Oxford, ardent anti-creationist. He said this. He said, there is a question that nobody except a creationist would ask. A real biologist finds it an easy answer to question. The answer is that natural selection increases the information content of the genome all the time. Did you just see that? No, it's wrong. I'm not trying to be smart. I have a very good friend some years ago. He was a microbiologist PhD. And he used to avoid talking about creation with me. And then just one day, and I said, do you believe for evolution to be true that there has to be an increase in the genetic information in the genome? He said, yes. And I asked him, have you ever seen a single example in the lab, in nature, where it increases the information content? And he thought about it and he went, no. I said, but do you believe it has to happen for evolution to be true? And he said, yes. That's a faith position, ladies and gentlemen. We actually have a documentary. Go to creation.com, go to our website, type in Dawkins Stumped. He was asked this question. He asked the cameras to be turned off, went away for 20 minutes and came back and still didn't answer the question. He said, well, if you'd have been here 300 million years ago, you would have seen this happen. Faith position. So don't be misled in thinking that natural selection is a friend of evolution. God front-loaded enough DNA, enough information onto the DNA of all of those kinds of creatures to allow them to adapt and survive in post-fall, post-flood environments. I want you to imagine if we could take a dressmaker's pin, right? Just the pinhead there, and pile a bunch of DNA, enough to fill the pinhead, how many letters of information do you think we would have? Well, you'd have enough information, enough letters to fill a pile of paperback books to the moon 240 times in a pinhead's worth of DNA. So we've got all that information was there. Remember, like the dogs, we can only select from pre-existing information. That's what we see happening. Okay? Now, the other aspect they rely upon is mutations. I'm going to talk about that because mutations are copying mistakes in a moment. But world-leading Professor Paul Davies, an atheist, okay, he's not a Christian, he says, how did stupid atoms spontaneously write their own software? Nobody knows. There is no known laws of physics able to create information from nothing. When you grab one of my books out there, right, and you open the pages, there are all the letters on the page, you'll see them. Are the letters themselves information? They're actually not. The letters have to be arranged into words and sentences to produce information. You see the difference? It's an information code, a language system, and that's exactly what we see on the DNA. That's what he's referring to. It's not randomness, ordered, lettered information. So another example of that, imagine I could go out to a local pond or swamp here or something, and I grabbed a lovely green tree frog. Okay, we did a scientific experiment. I brought him back here, and I put him in the blender, all right? Whir it up. I got this lovely frog smoothie, okay? Put him on the table. Will it ever reassemble itself into a frog? Of course not. But hang on, I've got all the ingredients for life. I've got fats and salts and protein. It's all there. What have I done? I've scrambled the information. I've scrambled the letters. All life is based upon this complex information code, the hallmarks of a creator. When you see letters and words and sentences, it's a sign that a greater source of information had to put it there. Another example, I talked about kinds. Lions and tigers, man-made word, species, they're separate species. But guess what? Lions and tigers, remember I said cats can interbreed. This guy's called a liger. The dad's the lion, he gets the first naming rights. Other way around, be a tigon. Lots and lots of examples. Now you're looking at that and saying, oh, well, they're called hybrids, and hybrids are infertile. Some hybrids are infertile. The majority of them aren't. They can reproduce. Look at this. That's a baby karma, offspring of a camel and a llama. Shows you that camels and llamas were originally one created kind. These are being bred because they have the endurance of camels, but they produce nice long fur, like llamas do. See, remember in the last talk I mentioned that God created according to their kinds. Look, creatures of the sea, every living, moving thing, according to their kinds, according to their kinds, according to their kinds, according to their kinds. When you get that repetition, like the first day, the second day, the third day, God is trying to tell us something. Okay? Kinds of creatures. But you're going to hear the word species. Okay? By the way, here's some of the different kinds. Okay? The mixing, karmas, a wolfen, false killer whale and a dolphin bred in captivity, a pig and a boar, buffalo, liger, pizzly bear. I mean, we can go on. They have all these weird names for them, but it shows you they came from original created kinds. Sheep and goats will interbreed, for example. When we look at the horse kind, I mentioned earlier zebras. They can interbreed with horses, for example. But what happens, okay, as creatures after the flood populated and went off to different environments, we're going to see that nature selects some characteristics to make that population distinct. And animals, they tend to, and actually humans do it, you tend to marry people, okay, more like yourself in terms of your physical characteristics, skin shade, etc. So as I said, we have these modern varieties, which we call species. Now, what is a species? Toss a coin. So sometimes, boys and girls, a scientist might say, look, we see new species being produced. So again, you could select down and select down and select down, no longer interbreeds with the parent population, you'd call it a new species. Or like lions and tigers, they might look different, they call it a new species. And sometimes in the fossil record, we see fossils of a creature up here and fossils of a creature down here, supposedly separated by tens of millions of years of time. They're identical, but they say they must be separate species because they could not have existed at the same time. We're going to talk about the time issue in a moment. So what were those original created kinds like exactly? We don't know. We don't know. It's very hard to determine, their color, their skin shades or something like that. So evolution says we all came from some primordial cell, okay, in a primordial swamp. And all life happens there. But I've just shown you that selection, the environment, reduces information. Evolution has got to add information. And misrepresented is this idea of the creationist law, and that, God may have created lions and tigers. And that's what the early creationists believed. And of course, unfortunately, that stuck for many years post-Darwin, is that they thought that every single species God must have created. But this is more like what we call a creationist orchard, that God created distinct kinds and we've had change, okay, since then. So what about mutations? Well, mutations are copying mistakes. If I had a sheet of paper here and I said, Pastor, could you go and photocopy that on the church computer? And when it gets back, I see one letter has been corrupted. But then I take the corrupted sheet and we go and photocopy it again. And what happens? We're going to keep multiplying the mutations. Mutations build up over time. So they're copying errors. Now, it's not often you increase the instructions, right, or make them better by introducing errors in a perfectly designed system, and that's what we see. And all of us, ladies and gentlemen, are suffering from mutations. It's called genetic entropy. Every organism we've looked at. Now, remember I said natural selection can cull. Okay, so let's say an antelope is born in Africa with 3 legs instead of 4. Is he going to be able to pass his genetic information on to his offspring? No, because he's going to get selected out by the lions pretty quickly. But when we're talking about just letter mistakes in our DNA, nature can't see them. Right? They're not obvious unless they're big physical deformities, so they don't get selected out. So our mutations are increasing. And they're increasing in the environment and the population at a rapid rate. It's why we're starting to see increasing birth defects and allergic reactions to foods and medicines, etc., because of this mutational load. The bad news, and you all knew this anyway, is we're all going to die. There's no future for the human race. If we were around long enough, we would all be mutated out of existence. But we can use this like a genetic clock, because they say Homo sapiens have appeared 200,000 years ago. If that was the case, we'd probably already be mutated out of existence at the rate the mutations are increasing in the population. So are mutations likely to help? Well, didn't help this guy. That chicken is suffering from the TNR mutation. It's a very technical name. TNR stands for totally naked rooster. All right? So no feathers. In the heat, it's going to get sunburned. No feathers cold, going to die out. So not going to survive naturally in the wild. That's what mutations do. And Carl Sagan, one of the world's most famous evolutionist atheists, he said mutations occur at random, almost uniformly harmful. It is rare that a precision machine is improved by the random instructions for making it. Very true. We can all understand that. So mutations are copying mistakes in our DNA. So add that to natural selection, which can only reduce and select from what's already available. It's no friend of evolution. So let's talk about human beings, because Darwin popularized the idea in his second book called The Descent of Man that there were different races of what we call humans today. There's an example. This persisted for years and years and years. And this, I have to point out, this was science, okay? So let's look at this. I wrote an article, by the way, on our website. There was this article called The Top 10 Daily Consequences of Having Evolved, and this was the picture they used. But as you go back, yes, there's more fur covering, but do you notice how people are darker. And I wrote about that, and then evolutionists contacted and said, oh, no, you know, we don't believe that anymore. It's just fur covering, etc. And so they were trying to evade the fact that evolution had said, and starting with Darwin, that people with darker skin, the so-called black races, he believed were less evolved. He did an experiment. He took people from South America. It's in our documentary, which we're going to give you for free with the Creation magazine. Took them to England, trained them in civilized ways, put them back in South America, hoping they would pass civilization to their neighbors. But when he went back years later, he said they'd reverted to savagery. And he developed this idea that the so-called dark races were less evolved. And that persisted right up until very, very recently. By the way, when they said I was being, creating a straw man, have a look at this. This is from the Smithsonian. It's there. Time magazine, the world's most famous anthropologist, Richard Leakey. What has he got? He's got an African man there with a kind of a rubber mask on, and that's supposedly Homo habilis. Still in the textbooks today, ladies and gentlemen. Just go to the museums and you can see it. So are there different races on the earth? No. There's one race, the human race. Variation within that race, just like we would see anything else. We have different skin colors. No, I'm going to show you. We have one skin color. It's a brownish pigment called melanin. But in the same way that animals moved about, I'm going to show you in a moment, after the earth, people did that as well. So I said there's about 3 billion letters of DNA. I could take a single strand of human DNA, about 3 billion letters. That's like stacking 1,000 Bibles on top of one another. All those letters in 1,000 Bibles. Can you imagine that? And every letter's got to be just in the right place, just in the right spot, again, to instruct the cells what to make. So how many skin colors? Well, do you remember how I showed you with the dogs? The dogs were in the medium range for fur length because they had information for short fur, long fur. Again, before we had the study of modern genetics, when I first got introduced to creation, they said, well, we think Adam and Eve must have been in the medium brown range. Medium brown skin, medium brown hair, medium brown eyes. It's probably been borne out by science today. Genetically, ladies and gentlemen, genetically speaking, do you know that all the human beings on this planet, every human being, we are 99.9% genetically alike. The so-called racial differences are less than 1% of our genome. And for some of you who studied the sciences, I won't go into it, but you remember the Punnett squares you used to see, okay? So Adam and Eve, medium brown hair, medium brown skin, medium brown eyes, all the genetic information necessary to produce different shades in their offspring. And Adam and Eve had many sons and daughters. They could have produced light to dark in one generation, ladies and gentlemen. You know, 70% of the world's population today, guess what? Medium brown skin, medium brown hair, medium brown eyes. And this article here from Creation magazine is still probably the most popular talked about article we've ever produced in 40 years of publishing the magazine, the two-tone twins. I've shown this, I've been to churches, particularly in the South, they come up to me and they say, I don't believe that. So that's the legacy we have to deal with. And pretty much as a result of evolution. Yes, they are twins. Guess, have a look, there's the parents. Medium brown skin, medium brown hair, medium brown eyes. There's the girls growing up today. Now, they would have had some white ancestry in their background to be able to do that. But this is just actually simple genetics. But people never understood it pre-Darwin or not long after. So the Bible indicates we started from one family tree, many sons and daughters. But then what happens, okay, all the variety we have in the population pre-flood, it gets genetically bottlenecked through Noah and his family. Right? 3 sons, 3 daughters-in-law. Noah and his wife didn't have any more children, but Noah, believe it or not, he was nearly 600 years old before he had children. So how did people live long ages? Well, before the flood, they lived for long ages. After the flood, it starts to decline. 2 things happened. A genetic bottleneck, we're losing all that diversity because we now only have 3 breeding pairs, 3 couples. Okay? But Noah was nearly 600 years of age. Guess what? He's passing on more mutation, aged DNA to his offspring. It's like a 60-year-old man like me having children for the first time. The reality is we're going to pass on more aged DNA. And I'm not going to see it, occur in the first few generations, but over time it's going to reduce the lifespan. By the way, creationists used to believe in that water vapor canopy thing. We got rid of that a long time ago. We now know the answer is probably a genetic one. But then people move out to different parts of the earth. So they moved to places like Australia. And probably originally in Australia, there were fair-skinned people like me, medium brown-skinned people, and dark-skinned people. But when Captain Cook visited there in 1788, he only encountered really, really dark-skinned Aboriginals. Well, guess what? In Australia, we have the highest rates of skin cancer in the world. We're obsessed with it when you grow up. And your children are not allowed to go out and play at school without a hat, and so on and so forth. So what happened? Selection. Fair-skinned people, we get skin cancers, we die, we don't pass that information on to the next generation. But people with dark skin, a pigment called melanin, and we all have it. See? I was going to look for a white piece of paper somewhere. But anyway, you can imagine, I don't have white skin, do I? It's not white as in white like a sheet of paper. Yeah, put it against your shirt, son. See? Not white, are you? See, I'm light brown. Some people are medium brown, some are dark brown. Dark brown skin, lots of melanin, natural survival advantage in hot climates. Is it any surprise? That's why we see dark-skinned people living in hot climates. Okay? Brown eyes, lots of melanin. Blue eyes, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got blue eyes, they're not blue. They actually just don't have any melanin in them. So it's a bit of an optical illusion. Refraction of the light makes them look blue. If you're a natural blonde, you don't have much melanin in your hair. My wife, blonde hair, blue eyes, fair skin. A typical Aussie Sheila, we'd say. My 4 children all fell out on her side of the gene pool. Blonde-haired, blue eyes, fair skin. And if they marry blonde-haired, blue-eyed, fair-skinned people, they'll only have blonde-haired, blue-eyed, fair-skinned children. You see, loss of melanin. I always point out to my wife, you see, it means that blondes really do have less information. Anyway. Genetic information, I should point out. So there we go. So again, then we have the Tower of Babel event. This is what explains it. Languages get confused and people move off into those new post-flood continents, moving into different environments. A common gene pool, language barriers, and then we end up with these alleged racial differences. I could talk about Asian people here. Actually, just a little fat layer under the eyes gives that almond shape, etc. But we actually all have one skin color, one skin pigment, melanin, and that's it. There's one race, ladies and gentlemen, the human race. Now, I can talk with some authority being an Australian because in terms of this race issue, Australian Aboriginals have suffered more at the hands directly of evolutionary teaching than any other people group on the earth. We're a fairly new country. As I said, 1788, migration didn't occur until really the mid-late 1800s, right after Darwin's book were published. So have a look at this. This was a newspaper clipping from 1924. Stone Age men discovered on an Antarctic island. Tasmania, that's an island state. Look. So that island, Tasmania, got separated from the mainland. So those features became more indwelling in the population. Very dark skin, lots of curly hair. 1924, Stone Age people. Stone Age, where does that come from? Evolution. Okay? Stone Age men living on an unfrequented island in the Antarctic have been discovered by Australian scientists who may be able to shed light on one of the greatest problems confronting anthropologists. What are they? They're just human beings. And you know, I normally kind of bring an upbeat message, but this is something I have to deal with. Because Australian Aboriginals, just post-Darwin, right up even until the early 1900s, by scientists from America, Europe, Britain, were shot and killed and taken back to universities for medical experiments. Human beings. It upsets me because I'm an Australian, and these are my fellow countrymen that this was done to. By the way, I'm an American citizen now as well, so there you go. And in case you think I'm being far-fetched, just a couple of years ago, look at this. Here's a couple of Aboriginal elders at a small university, not a major university in Germany. the university decided to repatriate the remains. 53 human skeletons, 53 Aboriginal skeletons, okay, were returned. That's just one university. We can go on. We've got the figures here. Over 10,000 Aboriginals taken to British Museum, presumably those missing links. Okay, we go on. The Smithsonian here in Washington has the remains of over 15,000 individuals of various races around the world. Museums provided instructions on robbing graves, how to plug bullet wounds in freshly killed Aboriginal specimens. Missionary accounts of how Aboriginal men, women and children were murdered, had their skulls boiled down and then exported overseas to collectors. See, missionaries recorded that. And here's the point. All that was done in the name of science, evolution. Okay? What were the missionaries doing? Why do we send people to darkest, deepest Africa where people look different? Those missionaries did not have the hindsight or the benefit of genetics, but they trusted what the Bible said. They must be human beings. They must be descendants of Adam. They're worthy of salvation. And guess what? They've been proven right, haven't they? By trusting God's word. See, Darwin said, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate the savage races throughout the world. And that's why those types of experiments were done. There's the movie, Darwin, The Voyage That Shook the World. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Peter Bowler, he sits in Darwin's office in Cambridge and we interview him and he writes, by the time he writes to The Descent of Man, it's pretty clear that he believed, Darwin, the non-white races do not have the capacity to be elevated properly into civilized human beings. They are mentally and morally more at a limited level. In a sense, they are stuck at an earlier stage in the biological evolution of human species. It's pretty horrible, isn't it? See, that's the danger of evolution. Hitler, ardent evolutionist. Why did he do what he did in the gas chambers? They wanted breeding room. He believed the white Aryan race was genetically superior. The Jews were experimented on in the Nazi concentration camps and so on and so forth. And I want to make a point here because, you know, America has a different history when it comes to racial issues. The Origin of Species is written in 1859, 26 years after slavery was abolished in the British Empire. The Descent of Man, this is the one where he talked about human evolution, was written 38 years after the abolition of slavery in Britain and 16 years after the 13th Amendment in the United States. Slavery was abolished long before Darwin wrote his book. Yet racism increased by orders of magnitude following the acceptance of evolutionary theory. I have an article on the website about the Bronx Zoo, New York. They apologized for putting an African pygmy on display in the orangutan exhibit in the 1920s. And they apologized for being racist. No, they should have apologized for being evolutionist. And, you know, we're tearing down statues in all sorts of political correctness today, but no one's tearing down Darwin's statues because there's the culprit. That's why racism ultimately increased in orders of magnitude, ladies and gentlemen, viewing fellow human beings as less than human. You know, Richard Dawkins again, he says, I'm a passionate Darwinian when it comes to science, when it comes to explaining the world. I'm a passionate anti-Darwinian when it comes to morality and politics. It's a bit of a hypocritical statement, isn't it? See, he would say, yes, all human beings are genetically similar, right? So, but he still wants to advocate evolution. And again, here a leading article by a geneticist talking about Dr. Ventnor, who was the head of a genetics corporation. This is back in 2000, where they first sequenced the human genome, and they declared there's only one race, the human race. Amen. And that's what the Bible says. Look at that in Acts 17:26. Of one man, of one blood, the old King James says, he made every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. Wow. What a prediction the Bible made long before there was a study of genetics. And again, I want to point out that early Christians, they made a stand on what they believed on God's word in face of not science, ladies and gentlemen. I love science. Science gives us great technology. Don't be anti-science. Don't be anti-establishment. Be anti-evolution, okay? Science gives us great things, medical advancements, and so on. You see, one of the issues when we're dealing with the past and we hear that word science, people get a bit confused, because when most of us think about science, I think most of us think about a very well-defined area called operational or experimental science, stuff that gives us laptop computers, sends man to the moon. That differs to alleged events, both creation and evolution, that happened in the past. We'd call that operational science. See, experimental science, you can do experiments in the present, repeat them, test the results. If I wanted to test the boiling point of water today, do it today, tomorrow. It'll boil at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, won't it? Or 100 degrees Celsius in the proper language. But anyway. But what about the idea that apes evolved to humans 2 million years ago? Anybody see that? Can you repeat it? No, we find fossils in the ground. But what do? They interpret those fragments as either a missing link. We've looked at them all. We think they're either apes, extinct apes, or they're fully human beings. Neanderthals, the poster boy for evolution when I was growing up, guess what? They've sequenced their genome. He's human. In fact, all of us here, we actually have Neanderthal DNA in us. That means humans, species, and Neanderthals bred. It can only happen if we're both the same species, human beings, ladies and gentlemen. See, and I want to deal with this millions of years, and I'll tell you why. But let me just explain again the millions of years and why this is important. Because remember I explained how fossils form, right? Fossils have to be able to form very quickly to get preserved fossils. Yet we're told that fossils, including those of alleged ape men, form very, very slowly a long, long time ago. But to get a rapid fossil, here's old Freddie Fish swimming along, you're going to need a lot of water, a lot of mud, and a short amount of time to bury it. Okay, you bury it in those layers, and before long, you get yourself a rapid fossil. Okay? Now, the issue here is, I said the rock layers is where the millions of years come from. I'm going to use the Grand Canyon as an example. Can you see these big bands? This is called geologic strata, these wide bands. But in them, sometimes you can see them alternating light and dark. You get these very fine layers called sedimentary layers. And it's believed that wind or water blows these sediments in, and maybe it's about 1 or 2 millimeters thick, and that's 1 year. And then the next year, there's another flood, buries another layer. So you look at the Grand Canyon with hundreds of millions of layers, and they assume you're looking at hundreds of millions of years history. Well, I'm going to show you something now, and I know some of you creation groupies are familiar with this, but what I'm about to show you is significant because it turned me from an old earth evolutionist into a Bible-believing creationist. And it was the volcanic explosion in Mount St. Helens in 1980. You can watch this on YouTube. There are free documentaries there. They knew it was going to erupt. The earthquake was shaking. The mountain was shaking, giving off earthquakes. See how it was venting at the top? And when it did explode, it didn't blow its top. Look at that. It blew its side. 1/3 of the volcano vanished in just a few seconds. It blew lumps of rock as big as a city block over 6 miles from the blast site. But ladies and gentlemen, this is just a baby when we consider some of the geologic events in Earth's history. And in the aftermath of the initial eruption, it laid down bands of strata. Can you see those 3 separate bands? There's a lady there for scale. But look at this band here. See all these very, very fine laminations? There's a close-up. And the conventional way secular geologists have interpreted these is like 1 per year. So in that 21-foot band of sediment, there are thousands of layers. Did it take thousands of years to lay them down? No, they were laid down precisely, there it is, the middle one, on June 12, 1980, in just 3 hours as a result of the volcanic eruption of Mount St. Helens. When you go back to Mount St. Helens, there are canyons all over the place. Have a look here. This little river, this stream, it's called the North Fork of the Toutle River. And again, the way we've all been evolutionized, we probably think, wow, that little river eroded over a long period of time and gradually eroded the canyon. That's what they say about the Grand Canyon. It took tens of millions of years. But in fact, nearby Spirit Lake had overfilled with water from the volcanic eruption, and they diverted water from Spirit Lake into this little area, and they eroded this canyon in just a few months. And don't think the material was soft and flushed away. The floor of the canyon is solid basalt. That's hard volcanic rock. And you can see the striations, in other words, the scouring of the rock where it's been eroded by fast-flowing mud and water. And by the way, you see that little side canyon there? They call that Little Grand Canyon. It's a 1/40th scale of the Grand Canyon. I'd love to tell you that one took a few months to form, but actually that was formed in less than 24 hours as a result of a giant mud flow. So here's the issue. Why did I show you that? Because the geologic layers are where the idea of millions of years comes from. But I mentioned earlier, if we have lots of mud, lots of water, lots of sediment burying billions of creatures all over the earth, what does the Bible indicate? What is, as a creationist, do I think that is evidence of? The flood of Noah's time. Does anybody know how long Noah's flood, how long the flood waters were on the earth? No, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The flood waters were on the earth for 12 months, 1 year. So here's the kicker. If all of those geologic layers with dead things in them, fossils, which evolutionist says is hundreds of millions of years of Earth's history, if most of that was laid down in the 12 months of Noah's flood, where did the millions of years just go? It's not there. If there's no millions of years, there's no time for evolution to happen. There's no time to turn apes into humans. It all goes away. And that's why creationists, ladies and gentlemen, are dogmatic about the age of the earth. The Bible clearly gives us the time frame of the Bible. You see, we see in the Bible, God created day 2, day 3. It was good, it was good, it was good. We get to day 6 and it was very good. The Hebrew term there is tov mi'od, which means finished, perfection, completion. So God's looking at all he made and he says it's perfect. But those millions of years, remember I said they come from the rock layers? The millions of years is a record, according to evolutionists, of death and disease and suffering on the earth. So would Adam and Eve been standing on this fossil graveyard underneath them and God looks at it all and says, yeah, that's very good. There's a theological problem there, isn't there? Of course, God did not do it that way. And you know, there are over 100 references to the book of Genesis in the New Testament. Earlier I mentioned Jesus speaking about a real Adam and Eve, a real Noah's flood. And Romans 5:12 says, sin entered the world through one man and death through sin. In this way death came to all men because all sin. There was no death and bloodshed before Adam. The reason we die, the reason we get genetic mutations is because of Adam. God says, I will put thorns and thistles in the ground, all right? Increase your pains in childbearing. You will die. Didn't drop dead straight away. The Hebrew is dying, dying. You will slowly die, and that's what happened. Entropy started to happen on the face of the earth. Should we take Genesis literally? Well, if Genesis is not real literal history with a literal very good creation, with a literal Adam and Eve, and if sin did not literally enter the world through their actions, then you and I literally don't need to be saved from anything. It's because of the Bible's history. The reason all those New Testament authors referred to the book of Genesis is they believed them as real historical events. And I'm going to say something I normally don't say. But as an Australian, and I'm an American now, but I think I've had the benefit of living in different places. And I've got to be honest, I don't like what I'm seeing in America at the moment. We've never been more divided, ladies and gentlemen. There are all of these issues out there. And you know what I'm seeing? I'm seeing Christians getting more focused on those issues and politics. And I'm not saying they're not important, but I always go back to the Bible. What is the most important thing we should be doing? In fact, let me ask you, what was the greatest commandment when Jesus was asked about it? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, strength, soul, and he added mind. We can do that today. And what was the last part? So who's your neighbour today? Who's your neighbour? Maybe a black person lives next door you've never spoken to, never had it over for a grill. You know, we find evangelism difficult because we're always frightened of questions. But you know, every time I sit on a plane, and it happened yesterday when I flew up, I ordered my Diet Coke and somebody said, where are you from? So from Australia, what are you doing here? I'm the CEO of Creation Ministries International. My very first trip to the United States in 2005, I was sat next to a laser weapons scientist and he said, are you one of those awful young earth creationists? That was a way to start a conversation. I had 4.5 hours sitting next to him on the plane, so I grabbed down my laptop and I just showed him information. He said, I've never heard that before. Here's the point. I don't get intimidated. Yeah, probably because I have a bit of knowledge, but the main reason is because it's not my job to save people. It's not your job to save people. You can't save anybody. But guess what we are called to be? A faithful witness. And that's why I bring all that information there. See, let's say we get a Christian president into power. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But then next election he gets voted out. Big deal. You want to change this country, you want to change, and it starts, like 12 men started heading out from the Middle East to change the world under the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. You do it by changing hearts and minds towards Jesus Christ. When we're back on track and we follow Christ, that's when we will see change. Can it be done? Happened before. That's how this country was once a great Christian nation, in fact. People came here with great convictions. I said to Pastor earlier, just like Australians, it was a penal settlement. They had great convictions as well. There we go. But let me encourage you with that. So guess what? You can give a book to somebody, a magazine, a DVD, and that's why we bring this information here today. I hope that encourages you. All right? It's pretty sobering to hear those horrible things done, wasn't it? To human beings made in God's image as a result of evolution. Again, not science. Science is good. Okay, remember that. Don't be anti-science or anti-establishment. So I want to finish with a few resources. Again, if I didn't cover anything today, go to creation.com. Creation Magazine, I'm going to pass some sign-up sheets around. I know we've been here before, quite a few of you get it. But this is the most popular resource we have. All of that stuff I showed you there, like the two-tone twins and everything, came from Creation Magazine. There's no advertising in it. So that's why, hand on heart, I can stand before you and faithfully promote it in church today. It comes out 4 times a year. It's posted to you. So I didn't mention radiometric dating. Here's an example. This rock, this volcanic rock, when the rock seals and cools, there's no more material going in, so the radioactive decay clock starts. So we knew the age of the rock was 50 years, and we sent it off to a radiometric dating lab, and it came back with an age of 1.35 million years. Now, they are measuring the radioisotopes in it, but it's the assumptions they made about how much was in it when it started. That's what gives it the long ages. And you know, fossils. I tell you, if I had $1 for every time somebody mentioned fossils to me talking about evolution, I'd be a rich man. But have a look. Here's a fossilized teddy bear. Now, unless you think teddy bears were around millions of years ago, in which case you need to come and see me, but obviously fossils can form very, very rapidly under the right conditions. Information changes lives. It changed mine. Myself and most of my scientific colleagues in the ministry, we were all former evolutionists, ladies and gentlemen. Fredgie here, he said, your work was very important for me, becoming a faithful believer in the Bible. I was an atheist, convinced of evolution, until a year ago, and I started to listen to those crazy young earth believers trying to disprove them, and here I am now, praise the Lord. People don't think there's any information for creation. Why? Because we're only taught one side of the story in our public education system. And I love this one here. This young man, my first trip back to Australia, he came up to me in a church, and I'll never forget it because he started to break down and cry, and he just kept saying, thank you, Mr. Bates. And I said, look, send me your testimony, be an encouragement to others. And he said, thank you for your ministry. As a child, a family friend bought me a subscription to Creation Magazine. I attended public schools where evolution is taught, but with the information provided to me through your magazine, my faith was never shaken by evolution. I'm now a Sunday school teacher, and my favorite topic is showing God's glory through creation. I attribute your magazine, simple magazine, because he got information he'd never heard before, as a major contributor to the strength of my faith and my love of science. Thank you again. So when we pass these forms around in a minute, if you get the magazine, you can actually help someone else get the magazine. You write your name and address on the front and their name and address on the back, and we'll send it to them on your behalf. It'll just arrive in their mailbox. So in a moment, my volunteers are going to pass around these sign-up sheets. The magazine for 1 year is $29. It's cheaper for 2 at $50. Now what we do, and we don't do this on the website, it's an encouragement for you to get it today. If you sign up for the magazine today, we're going to give you the digital version for free. So you've got to put your email address on, we'll send you the digital version, and guess what you do with the digital version? You can click forward. Your children, your colleagues, people in other countries, send them the Creation magazine and they can read it on their own devices, etc. It's normally $19 just for the digital, by the way. You get our free newsletters here in the US. I obviously write a lot of these. Keeps you up to date with what's happening as well. So if you sign up for 1 year, okay, we're going to give you the current issue today, right? So you can start reading, you don't have to wait till it's posted. Okay, we're going to give you the free digital version. If you sign up for 2 years, you get all that, plus we're going to give you a free DVD, and that's that Darwin documentary we mentioned. We retraced Darwin's voyage of the Beagle, we spoke to evolutionists and creationists, and we basically said if Darwin knew today what we know about science, would he have ever been an evolutionist? If he'd have studied genetics, do you think he would have made that statement about races, for example? No. And then we're going to give you a second documentary called Fallout. And this is where I went onto university campuses around Georgia and I interviewed students. And I asked 4 questions. The first question was, were you raised in the church or not? And if they said no, I let them move on. So I only wanted these students who said they'd been raised in Christian homes. And the next question, I said, evolution or creation, what's true? That's it. And out of the hundreds of students who said they'd been raised in Christian homes, ladies and gentlemen, only 5 said they still believed in biblical creation. The next question to all of them, when you were in church, at home, did your pastors, parents, leaders, anybody show you the wealth of information we have for biblical creation? And all of the students who said they were raised in a Christian home but now believed in evolution, every single one of them had said they'd never been shown information. Yet the handful, the 5 that still believed, everyone said they had been shown information. And the last question was, do you still attend church? And all those kids that now believed in evolution, except for one young man, and we put him in the documentary to show we were not stacking the deck, no longer no longer attended church, only one of them. So there are lots of reasons young people leave the church, but the number one intellectual reason I can tell you is evolution. So, mums and dads, grandparents, we need to do a bit more at home to prepare our young ones because it's inevitable they're going to be taught evolution in higher education. So when the forms come around, tick how many years you want, okay, and tear off the coupon, tear it off, pass the clipboard around, bring the coupon up to the ladies, you get the current magazine, and if you sign up for 2 years, you're going to get those 2 free DVDs today. Thanks, guys. And if you would circle them, ladies and gentlemen, while that happens, I'll go on. Let me mention this again, evolution's Achilles' heels. We have a geneticist in that, PhD geneticist, who talks about genetic entropy. And he talks about every single organism we worked at, the genomes are decaying. They're getting worse over time. And as I said, natural selection can't reduce them. The culprit for millions of years, I explained, was geology. When somebody showed me Mount St. Helens and all those layers could be formed quickly, I realized it wasn't rocket science. There was no time for revolution to happen. Okay? So, parents, study this book yourself and you'll get a lot out of it. There's the companion dinosaur book. We have some children's packs left, I hope. There's my book there called One Big Family, and it starts off by saying, who's your neighbor? Asking children the question, who's in your family? Of course, most kids would say mum and dad, brothers and sisters. But guess what? We're actually all related. We are all related through Adam. And as Christians, of course, been taken into another family, haven't we? The Genesis account, if you like creation, you want something in depth, this is the Rolls-Royce of creation books by Jonathan Safdie, 800 pages, a theological, scientific, historical commentary on the book of Genesis. That's the one book that does it all. And we have a 12 DVD set so you can do teaching after we've gone. Lots of churches want us back and back and back. So Genesis 1 to 11, 12 DVDs so they can be shared through classes. And there's a free study guide. Lots of our books and resources have free study guides online. We don't charge for those. But that's a great series for you to do in your church. I've got a couple of talks out there. One is the number one question. Why does a good God allow bad things? We normally avoid that. Well, we don't know when we get to heaven. Actually, we do know. Genesis chapter 3. We should expect bad things to happen. And it wasn't just human beings that were cursed. The ground was cursed, the animals were cursed, the plants were cursed. That's why we get tsunamis, earthquakes. And we never know when an airplane is going to come through our window. That's why the New Testament says today is the day of salvation. I've got a 2 DVD set, it's just $10, price of 1 DVD, called Creation Not Confusion. It's a thorough introduction to this talk, and it talks about dinosaurs and radiometric dating. I co-wrote this booklet because of the terrible exodus of youth in higher education. It's called The Creation Survival Guide, How to Graduate with Your Faith Intact. It's just a $4 booklet. We've had churches buy hundreds of these to give to their students. This book says this is what you're going to face when you get to college. And it talks about natural selection as well. How did we get our Bible? We all believe the Bible's the Word of God, but in my experience, most people can't defend it as in terms of preservation, inspiration, etc. A little $4 booklet, and there's a chart on the back that shows you the 2,800 cross-references in the 66 books of the Bible. Look at that, ladies and gentlemen, they're like a blur. So it's just a very simple way of explaining all of that. Another issue for our young people to deal with. And lastly, my book Alien Intrusion is out there. Okay, so evolution. If life evolved here, it must have evolved countless times over in a 14 billion year old universe. And if those aliens are 1 billion years advanced on the technological scale, that's how they can build faster than light spaceships and visit the Earth, all that type of stuff. A real pop culture one. We've had tons of testimonies out of that. And as Pastor mentioned, it was made into a movie in 2018, shown in over 1,000 theatres worldwide. But this is all about the gospel, ladies and gentlemen. Right at the end, you will see it is all about Jesus. Uses a pop culture topic to introduce the gospel, and that there's spiritual warfare occurring all about us. All right, that was a new talk. I compiled 2 parts, so I apologise for going over time, Pastor Stephen. I could talk for millions of years on the subject, but anyway.